If you asked anyone in Ogbete Market who had the finest fruits in all of Enugu, they would point you to a modest wooden stall at the far end of the street, the one shaded by a worn canvas and scented with ripe pineapples and fresh pawpaw. And if you look closer, you would find her there, a young woman with radiant dark skin, soft eyes full of quiet strength, and a warm smile that seemed to rise before the sun itself. Her name was Chika Okafor. She had only one leg. The other was lost in a tragic road accident when she was just 16. The crash crushed the public bus she was returning home in, along with the dreams of every other passenger. Chika survived, but not without pain, not without sacrifice. Now, with the help of a silver crutch and an artificial limb that often made walking unbearable, she wheeled herself to the market each morning before most people even stirred from sleep. She never complained, she never asked for pity, she simply arrived. Determined, graceful, and astonishingly cheerful. Chika had learned something that many in life never do, that gratitude can grow even in broken places. She did not allow her disability to define her. She was known not for what she lacked, but for what she gave, and how generously she gave it. The fruit she sold wasn't just sweet, it was exceptional. Juicy pineapples, golden mangoes, oranges that tasted like sunshine. She picked them herself from the best farm trucks at dawn, rejecting any that did not meet her strange and high standards. To her, every fruit carried dignity, and dignity should never be bruised. But it wasn't just her produce that kept people coming back. It was her spirit, her laughter, her kindness. She gave freely to widows, to tired mothers, to barefoot children with dusty foreheads and hungry eyes. Take one, she would often say, pressing a banana or an orange into a small hand, and tell your mother someone thought of her today. Even the other traders, hardened by life and competition, admired her. They often whispered that Chika had been touched by something divine. The way she endured, the way she smiled, the way she made others believe, even for a moment, that life was still good. That morning, as she polished her fruit with a damp cloth, she noticed a young man standing at a distance. He was out of place. He wasn't carrying anything. He wasn't speaking to anyone. Just standing near a rusty stall, watching the market with an intensity that didn't belong to a casual visitor. His clothes were dusty. His shirt hung too loosely around his frame. His sandals were torn at the edges. But it wasn't his appearance that struck her. It was his eyes. They were intelligent, clear, observant. But behind them, something hidden. Something like sorrow. Or was it weariness? Chika said nothing. She had learned long ago that some people came to the market looking for more than just food. Some came searching for a reason to keep going. Eventually, the man walked toward her. He stopped just in front of her stall. There was a flicker of hesitation in his posture, like someone torn between shame and necessity. Then he spoke, his voice low, polite. "Good morning, ma'am. I'm sorry to bother you. I haven't eaten today. If there's anything you can spare." Chika looked up, her eyes meeting his. There was no arrogance in him, no bitterness either, just quiet desperation, cloaked in the dignity of someone who had clearly not lived like this for long. She reached for a small bowl, filled it with slices of mango and watermelon, and handed it to him. "You don't need to apologize," she said gently. "It's not a crime to be hungry." The man took the fruit carefully, as if it might fall apart in his hands. He looked at her like people often looked at miracles, half in disbelief, half in awe. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Truly, thank you." Chika smiled. "You're welcome. If you're still hungry tomorrow, come again. I'll be here." He nodded, stepped back, and disappeared slowly into the crowd. As she returned to arranging her pineapples, Chika's mind lingered on the man's face. There was something unusual about him, something he wasn't saying, something beneath the silence. She didn't know his name. She didn't know his story, but somehow she felt in her heart that this was only the beginning. The next morning, just as the market was beginning to stir with the usual calls and commotion, Chika spotted him again. He stood across the road, leaning slightly against the wall of a locked stall, his eyes scanning the market like someone searching for a memory. He wore the same faded shirt, freshly washed this time, though still worn at the collar. His trousers were cleaner, his face freshly shaved, but it was his eyes that gave him away. Eyes that remembered kindness. eyes that now carried a subtle light where there had been only dimness the day before. When Chica looked up and their eyes met, he didn't hesitate. He crossed the road with purposeful steps and approached her stall. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," he said softly. Chica smiled. "You are not. I told you yesterday, come again if you're hungry. I meant it." He gave a small nod, almost like a bow. "Then, may I please have something again?" "I will find a way to repay you, I promise." Chica reached into her tray and began to peel a ripe banana. "You don't owe me anything," she said. "Sometimes giving is the only way we remind the world that it hasn't gone completely cold." She handed him the banana and a few slices of pineapple wrapped neatly in brown paper. "Eat and rest a little if you need to." He sat on a low bench beside her stall, careful not to get in her way as she served customers. He watched her work, his eyes occasionally darting to her artificial leg, then quickly away again as though embarrassed to have noticed. Chica didn't mind. She was used to curious glances. What she found interesting was how respectfully he looked away. No pity, no awkwardness, just a quiet understanding. After a while, she offered him a small bottle of water. "What's your name?" she asked. He hesitated. "John," he replied. "John Uzo." "Nice to meet you, John Uzo. I'm Chica. And now that we are properly introduced, you are no longer a stranger." He smiled, not widely, but it was the kind of smile that carried warmth, like sunlight breaking through gray clouds. For the next few days, John came back, always at the same hour, always quietly, never demanding. And every time Chica would offer him something, a slice of mango, a handful of cashew nuts, a few oranges packed in a paper cone, the traders began to notice. Gossip fluttered through the market like wind through dry leaves. "Have you seen that man who keeps going to Chica's stall? Maybe he's her cousin." "Cousin? That man is too fine for cousin talk." Chica ignored them. She had learned long ago that if you listened to every whisper, you would never walk your own path. One morning, after handing John his usual fruit, she turned to him with a curious look. "Forgive me for asking, but you look strong, healthy. You speak well. Why are you begging for food?" John lowered his gaze. For a moment, she thought he might not answer. Then slowly he spoke. "I studied civil engineering at university," he said quietly. "I graduated with honors. I sent out over 50 applications. I walked the streets of 3 cities. Every interview ended the same. We're looking for someone with more experience." He let out a bitter breath. "How do I gain experience when no one is willing to give me a chance?" Chica felt something shift inside her, something soft and deeply human. She had met many beggars, many wanderers, but few who spoke with such intelligence and clarity, and fewer still who had not been defeated by rejection. "Civil engineering?" she repeated, impressed. He nodded. She looked across the market, spotting a tall, muscular man wearing a reflective vest, his boots caked in dust. "Do you see that man?" she pointed. "He's an engineer, works with one of the road construction firms hired by the government. He buys fruit from me every Friday." John followed her gaze, his expression sharpening. "I'll speak to him," Chica continued. "He might not offer much, but it's worth a try." John turned back to her, eyes wide with disbelief. "You would do that for me?" She smiled. "Of course, someone gave me a chance once too, when I thought my life had ended. Now it's my turn to do the same for someone else." He stared at her as though he were seeing her for the first time. "You barely know me." "Kindness," Chica replied simply, "does not require a biography." For a long moment they said nothing. The market moved around them, noisy, bustling, alive. But in that brief stillness, something unspoken passed between them. Something that had nothing to do with fruit or charity. Something like the first spark of trust. Friday arrived with the scent of rainfall still lingering in the air from the previous night's downpour. The skies had cleared, but the earth remained damp, and puddles shimmered like mirrors between the stalls. The traders were already in full swing, the yam sellers haggling, the fishmongers slapping their fresh catch on wooden planks, and the tomato sellers singing out their prices as if in a choir. But for Chica, this morning was different. She had barely slept the night before. Her thoughts kept returning to John's story, his quiet dignity, his refusal to complain, and the loneliness in his eyes that he tried so hard to hide. She didn't know why she cared so much. Perhaps because she saw something in him, something familiar. The look of a person who had known loss and yet had chosen not to give up. She had cleaned her stall earlier than usual, rearranged her baskets twice, and wore her cleanest headscarf. Then she waited. By 9:30, she saw him approaching from the corner of the road, his steps slightly quicker than usual, as though something was urging him forward. He wore the same clothes, freshly washed, and held a piece of paper, perhaps his resume, tightly in his hand. "You came," she said, smiling. "I told you I would," he replied. "You said the engineer would be here today." Chica nodded, then gestured with her chin. "That's him, just arriving." A white pickup truck pulled up beside the stall, and from it stepped a large man in a yellow safety vest and a pair of well-worn boots. His skin was sun-darkened, and his forehead glistened with sweat. "Madam Chica," he greeted, grinning. "Hope my pineapple is ready." "Always," she replied warmly. "But today I also have something else for you. Someone I think you should meet." The man raised an eyebrow as Chica turned to John. "This is Mr. John Uzo. He's a civil engineering graduate. Bright, serious, and currently looking for an opportunity." The engineer glanced at John, then extended a hand. Graduate, you say?" "Yes, sir," John said firmly, shaking his hand. "First-class honors from the University of Nigeria in Nsukka. I've been searching for work for 2 years." The engineer folded his arms, studying him. "Do you have any field experience?" "Only during my industrial training," John admitted. "But I'm willing to learn. I can work overtime. I just need a chance, sir." The man scratched his chin thoughtfully. "I see. Well, I have a project site just outside Enugu. We're short-handed at the moment. It's mostly supervision and reporting. If you can prove yourself, maybe we'll keep you longer." John blinked. "Are you offering me a job?" "Let's call it a trial for now," the engineer said. "Bring your CV to my office on Monday. We'll see what you're made of." John could barely breathe. For a moment, he looked stunned, as though he hadn't heard the words correctly. Then he turned to Chica. Her eyes were already shining. He didn't speak. He couldn't. Instead, he stepped forward and did something unexpected. He dropped to one knee beside her wheelchair and took her hand. "Thank you," he whispered. "I don't know what I've done to deserve this, but thank you." Chica felt her heart twist. She squeezed his hand gently. "You've done nothing wrong. The world is simply slow to recognize good people sometimes." The other traders were watching now, curiosity piqued. Ada, the tomato seller, leaned toward her neighbor. "That man, he's not an ordinary beggaro. See the way he talks. He looks like someone born to lead." "I've been watching him too," her friend replied. "There's something different about him. Mark my words, this story isn't over." John stood and took his leave, promising to return after his appointment on Monday. As Chica watched him disappear into the crowd, her heart swelled with quiet joy. But she had no idea just how far this act of kindness would ripple, or how closely he had been observing not only the market, but her behind the smile. What Chica didn't know and couldn't have guessed was that John Uzo was not who he claimed to be. He was, in fact, Prince John Arinze Ekwemi II, the only son of the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Sent in secret by his father on a discreet federal assignment, John had gone undercover, disguised as a common beggar, to investigate ongoing complaints about the misuse of federal funds meant for road construction projects in the Southeast. Chica's kindness had not only taken him by surprise, it had unsettled him. In all the places he had visited, he had encountered indifference, scorn, and even ridicule. But here, in the heart of the marketplace, a girl who could barely walk, a girl who had so little, gave freely, smiled endlessly, and treated him like an equal. She didn't know his title. She didn't care about his status. She saw only a human being in need, and that, to John, was more powerful than gold. Monday came with a sweltering sun and a sky as cloudless as silence. Dust rose from the roads as vehicles sped by, and Enugu City moved with its usual rhythm, buses honking, vendors shouting, children laughing somewhere in the distance. John stood before a weathered iron gate on the outskirts of town, resume in hand, his white shirt crisply ironed and tucked neatly into the same faded trousers. He had borrowed a pair of shoes from a church acquaintance, 2 sizes too small, but he didn't mind. His heart beat loud enough to muffle the pain in his feet. This was it, the moment Chica had made possible. Inside the construction company's office, the walls were lined with blueprints and photos of half-finished highways. Engineer Agu, the man from the market, sat at a large wooden desk, leafing through John's CV with furrowed brows. "This is impressive," he said at last, adjusting his glasses. "You graduated top of your class?" "Yes, sir," John replied calmly. "And you've been looking for work ever since?" John gave a slight nod. Engineer Agu leaned back, tapping a pen against his chin. "Well, you're in luck. One of our supervisors fell ill. We need someone to monitor material delivery and write daily reports. It's not glamorous work. The site is hot, dusty, and full of stubborn laborers. Can you handle that?" "I've seen worse," John replied, eyes steady. The engineer chuckled. "I believe you. You start tomorrow morning. Be on site by 7 a.m. We'll see how long you last." John smiled faintly. "Thank you, sir. You won't regret it." A man on a mission. By 6:45 a.m. the next morning, John was already on the construction site, a partially completed rural road connecting 2 villages. It was the sort of project the government praised on television, but rarely inspected in person. Except that John wasn't just a new site assistant. He was watching everything. He inspected the laterite being poured, noting that it was far below the required density. He examined the cement bags and found some labeled with expired production dates. Steel rods meant for reinforcement had rust lining their cores. When he asked one of the workers about the discrepancies, the man simply shrugged. "Oga, no beat today. Dem go collect money from Abuja, but not cheap things dem they use build road." John took photographs discreetly, scribbled observations into a plain black notebook, and sent encrypted messages from a secured phone he carried in his pocket. He had been tasked by the presidency to identify companies using inferior materials, misappropriating federal funds, and endangering the lives of ordinary Nigerians. He had heard about the corruption for years, but now he saw it with his own eyes, and it sickened him. The irony wasn't lost on him. The very company that had offered him a job, the one he had been introduced to by Chica, was among the worst offenders. He was torn. He had to report them. But what would that mean for Chica? Would she think he had used her? Betrayed her kindness? These questions clung to his chest like lead. Back at the market, meanwhile, Chica waited anxiously at her stall. It was past noon when John finally returned, his shirt dusty, his face glistening with sweat, but his eyes lit with something she hadn't seen before. Hope. "Well?" she asked, barely containing her smile. He nodded. "I got the job. It's tough, but it's a start." Chica beamed. "I knew you would." He pulled up a small bench and sat beside her, watching as she handed slices of fruit to a group of barefoot children who had gathered around her stall. "You give too much," he said quietly. Chica shrugged. "I give what I can. If a child smiles because of an orange, isn't that a miracle in itself?" John looked at her, really looked, at the curve of her shoulders, the strength in her arms, the calm in her eyes. She was unlike anyone he had ever met, a woman who had every reason to be bitter, but had chosen instead to be kind. "What about you?" she asked suddenly. "What do you want to do with your life, truly?" He paused. "Honestly, I want to make things right. I want to rebuild the roads people drive on, the bridges they cross, the homes they live in. I want to fix what's broken." Her smile returned, softer this time. "Then do it. Start from wherever you are. Even a cracked road can lead somewhere beautiful." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Around them, the market bustled with color and chaos, but between them existed a rare kind of stillness, a stillness that felt like the beginning of something more, a confession waiting to happen. That evening, as John walked alone back to the presidential guest residence in Enugu, his thoughts raced. He knew his mission was nearing its end. He had enough evidence to expose the construction firm. His father, President Ekweme, was expecting a full report. But Chica? She didn't know. She thought he was a struggling graduate, a man with nothing but borrowed shoes and empty pockets. He had lived in her world, eaten from her kindness, and had grown to admire, even love her. Now the truth sat like a stone in his chest. He was the president's son, and he was falling for a girl who had no idea who he really was. But would she still smile at him when she found out? The sun burned high over Ogbet Market, casting long shadows behind every umbrella, wheelbarrow, and wooden stall. But despite the heat, the market was alive, more alive than usual. It had been 2 weeks since John began work at the construction site. Every day after work, no matter how dusty or exhausted he was, he came straight to Chica's fruit stall. They talked, laughed, and sometimes just sat in companionable silence. For those who watched them, and many did, it was clear that something unspoken had begun to blossom. But Chica never imagined what was coming. On that fateful Friday, she was arranging her right pawpaws, humming under her breath, when a familiar voice broke her rhythm. "Chica!" She turned and smiled. "You came early today." John looked different. He wore a fresh white shirt tucked into charcoal gray trousers. He had trimmed his beard. His eyes shimmered, with emotion, or maybe nerves. He carried something behind his back. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice quieter than usual. Chica's smile faded slightly. "Is everything all right?" He nodded. "Yes, more than all right." Then he stepped in front of her stall, right into the center of the market road. Traders turned. Shoppers paused. A meat seller dropped his cleaver mid-chop. And before Chica could say another word, John got down on one knee. Gasps erupted all around. Chica froze. "John, what are you doing?" "I came to this market looking for corruption," he said, voice firm and clear. "But I found something else, something far more powerful." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. When he opened it, a delicate gold ring nestled inside, catching the sunlight. "I found you." A hush fell over the crowd. People leaned in. Whispers rustled like dry leaves. "You saw me when no one else did. You helped me when you thought I had nothing. You gave without asking for anything in return. Chica, I have walked on marble floors and eaten from golden plates, but I have never known joy the way I feel when I'm beside you." Chica's hands trembled. Her heart thundered inside her chest. "This may sound like madness," John continued, "but I don't want to wait another day. I love you. I want you. Will you marry me?" She stared at him, stunned. Her lips parted, but no words came. People watched, waiting. A woman behind her whispered, "Say yes, nah." But Chica was overwhelmed. She placed a hand over her mouth, eyes filling with tears. I don't understand," she whispered. You're a site assistant. How can you afford this ring?" John's gaze held hers. And then he stood. He didn't speak. He simply raised his hand and clapped 3 times. Once, twice, thrice. Suddenly, from Colcamp Junction, a convoy of black SUVs turned into the market street. Doors swung open. Uniformed security men stepped out, surrounding the perimeter. People screamed. Some ran for cover. Others stood frozen, mouths agape. The vehicles were presidential. The insignias on the doors were unmistakable. John turned to the crowd, his voice strong. "My name is Prince John Arinze Ekwemi II, son of President Ndubisi Ekwemi. I came here undercover, sent by my father to investigate fraudulent contractors. But in the course of that mission, I found something more valuable than all the contracts in Nigeria." He turned back to Chica, whose eyes were wide with shock, her crutch falling loosely against her side. "I found a woman who showed me what strength truly means. A woman who gave even when she had so little. A woman whose spirit is richer than any palace I've ever walked through." Gasps echoed through the market. Traders who had mocked John as a beggar now gawked at him in disbelief. Chica tried to speak, but her voice cracked. "You lied to me?" "I hid the truth," he said gently, "because I needed to see people for who they really are. You showed me your heart without knowing who I was. That is why I'm here, not just to thank you, but to ask you to be my wife, not as a princess, not out of pity, but as a partner, as someone I respect and adore." Tears spilled down Chica's cheeks. Her heart felt too full for words. She looked around. The market, the place where she had been mocked, overlooked, pitied, was now clapping, cheering, celebrating her. She looked back at John, and slowly she nodded. Yes, The crowd erupted, a chorus of ululations, clapping, shouting. Joy poured out like rain in dry season. John slid the ring onto her finger. In that moment, Chica didn't see guards or flashing cameras. She saw only the man who had sat by her side, shared her fruit, and looked at her not as broken, but whole. Moral of the story: your value is not defined by your body, your wealth, or your title, but by the kindness you offer when no one is watching. Love does not seek perfection, it seeks truth. And sometimes the smallest acts of compassion carry the greatest rewards. I hope you enjoyed this story. Please share your thoughts and tell us what learned in the comment section. We would be very glad to read them. And guess what? There is another powerful educative story coming up in a few days. So please subscribe to this channel and turn on your notifications bell so you'll be the first to watch when we upload it. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the like button and share with your family and friends. Thank you so much for watching. God bless you.